Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining Huntress and Axient today to discuss planning for the next mass ransomware attack. We look forward to having you all here with us. We're going to give everyone just a couple more minutes to take their virtual seats before we get started. It looks like we have a lot of people that are still joining. I do want to go over a couple housekeeping items. We really want to keep today's session interactive, so please feel free to use that questions tab to ask Ben and Jason any questions you have, and we'll make sure to answer all of those today. So again, this is way more interesting when you have questions for us, so please feel free to utilize that questions tab. We also will be raffling off a $100 Amazon gift card, so we will email the winner with that gift card after today's session. But again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and with that, I'm going to pass things over to Huntress Security Engineer Jason Phelps.
Good afternoon and good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Jason. I am here with Huntress Security Engineer and here with Ben from Axient. And Ben, I'm gonna let you kind of kick us off with going over the Kaseya timeline. We had a bit of an unexpected July 4th weekend. I don't know where you guys, how early you guys got started on helping your customers, but love to hear your perspective on how that weekend went for you.
Yeah, it was definitely an experience for sure. You've got a really great timeline here. It kind of lays out some of the actual factual events, but from a color commentary from our standpoint, July 2nd there, 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock, yeah. 10 o'clock is about when we started getting customer inquiries and customer support inquiries coming in saying, hey, we got hit by ransomware, we need to recover. And I think the partners that got hit by the ransomware at that time didn't even really know how bad it was when they started making phone calls. So we had a couple partners call in and say, hey, we had a ransomware event. We're like, okay, cool, we'll help you out. And then we got a couple more, and then we got a couple more. And then the partners that called us up originally called us back and said, yeah, this is a lot worse than we thought. And then we started jumping online and we saw comments from, folks like Kyle, the CEO over at Huntress, and some other folks in the channel start saying, oh my God, there's Armageddon happening right now. And that's where we really started to, we said, holy crap, there's something big going on here. And so that's when on our side, at least, we cleared the runways and started making phone calls to everyone on our engineering teams, our cloud operations teams, and our support teams to say, all right, guys, hope you didn't have any plans for the weekend because it's going to be a long one, and really started pulling people back in to get them online and get them prepared for the chaos that definitely started ensuing that weekend. What did you guys start seeing when things started to unfold? Similar?
Yeah, so very similar. So we started getting phone calls, Eastern time, around lunch, in the middle of that lunch hour that day, from partners that were seeing their VSA servers encrypted, various different types of alerts from I had some folks getting emails that their VSA admins had been removed or locked out. And that was kind of an early warning that something's happening, right? And not sure what it was at that point. But then, as we got more and more partners calling us, similar to you guys, as we started getting more and more people calling, we realized that common thread. And our security team was able to get on the horn with Kaseya, help them share details and intel that we had. And as we know, they took down VSA, the cloud service, that afternoon, and then obviously told all the partners to make sure they shut down as well. It's interesting though, the timeline doesn't start July 2nd. It started back in April, or at least these particular vulnerabilities did. But really, this is a big call out to tech debt, and I think that's something that we hear about in the industry. And I came from software development background in the past, and tech debt was always something that we knew was there, but who has time to deal with that old code, right? And I mean, the particular pages or files from this attack, I mean, I used when I worked for an MSP that used VSA on-prem, And these were things that we used regularly. And so, it's stuff from 10 plus years ago that's still around. And, I think as kind of a thing to think about from our partners' perspective is, this can happen to anybody, but when it comes to tech debt, how many of us can say that we've addressed all of our tech debt? From whether it's old MSP partners that we haven't removed their tools to their accounts, firewall rules from that Exchange server we decommissioned, or those RDS servers we took offline, but we still have all of those ways into the network available. And so I think it's one takeaway from this is make sure that you have a list of that technical debt, or go through and clean it up, and just be aware of that. And we can talk about tech debt and all that stuff all day long, but I have been traveling to road shows and events. I know you have too, Ben, and I'm still hearing from partners that they didn't recover all this in a weekend. This took a lot of time, and I'd be curious from your side, how long have you been seeing partners take to actually get recovered from this, at least from restoring from backups?
Yeah, we just real quick too. We had Ben Jones from Central Technology Solutions says hello. So.
Hey Ben. Nice. Ben's in my town, so that's really neat. Hey Ben.
Yeah, I think because the partners that we saw get hit were definitely, it was not a huge swath of partners that got hit. Like, we didn't have a huge percentage of our base get hit, but it was a very small percentage. But the ones that did get hit got hit pretty hard, right? So it was like, total annihilation when they did get hit. So it was not an easy recovery. And, we had one partner that got hit pretty bad, where every one of his end users got compromised. So this wasn't like, hey, I have 2 or 3 people that got ransomware and I shut their systems off, I segregated them from the network, and we're able to protect them. This was oh my God, every one of my end users is compromised in some way. And so the immediate reaction was to just turn everything off, just shut it off, turn it off, and let's collect ourselves, figure out what's going on, come up with a plan of action, and then we'll attack it again. And because of that, which was a great thing to do, and just say, hey, look, let's stop this right now, it definitely prevented something that was really bad from getting really worse. But at the same time, the recovery became that much more difficult, because not only did you have to disinfect everything and get everything kind of cleaned up, but you also had to bring everything back online, which required rolling a truck, hands-on networks, hands-on sites. So it's not something that was 100% remote that you could do. You actually, it turned into a human capital logistics problem, where there was a lot of these MSPs just didn't have enough bodies to actually go on site to all the locations that were necessary to get things back up and running in a timely manner. And so, the attack was fairly easy to mitigate and fix once we had our bearings put in place and getting people recovered. But to get everyone recovered, we had a couple partners who took 6-8 weeks to kind of get fully back up and running. So it was fairly drawn out process to kind of get everything going again. So it definitely wasn't simple, and definitely wasn't fast. And that shows the breadth of these types of attacks and how devastating they can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we think about that, I think the first question that we can ask is, are you as an MSP prepared? And I think, unfortunately, the answer to that is often no, but I think there's some things that partners can do, right, to be prepared. And what have you guys seen that has been really successful, and maybe some things that came out of this attack that helped people be prepared, and maybe some things that came out that showed they weren't so prepared?
Yeah, I think this was a unique circumstance, right, where I don't think anyone was prepared, right? I don't think anyone was prepared for this en masse attack that happened with a supply chain attack like this. I think, everyone was kind of worried that it could happen, but nobody was prepared to deal with it when it did happen. Now, on the flip side, we did have a number of partners, and I'm sure you guys do as well, partners that were proactive in their security approach, who were doing the right things, with doing things like making sure that they had endpoint security on all their endpoints, using products like Huntress, making sure they had good backups, things like that. So their spectrum was kind of covered, and they were able to recover and get things identified quickly, and identify things fast, and then, prevent widespread attack. But I think that the things that I see lacking still in a lot of areas is just having a good incident response policy. I think the thing that people forget oftentimes is, yes, we can identify these things, and yes, we can deal with them as they pop up. But when a larger attack happens, having a good incident response policy that clearly defines who's going to do what and when is a critical piece, because you don't want to be making those decisions in the heat of battle, right? You start making those decisions when an event's happening. It's prone to error, it's prone to mistakes. How about you guys? What have you seen that's been working well for people, and where did you see the biggest gap in people's coverage?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things in terms of limiting damage, which is hard with this particular attack, right? Because it's a synchronized, coordinated attack. It happens globally. It's not something that is just a single customer. Some of the things that we saw, and this goes into that incident response plan, right, is being alerted when account admins or when admin accounts in your VSA were disabled. I think that was a clue for the partners that had those enabled that really helped them understand that this wasn't just one or two customers calling to say, hey, something is wrong. This was, hey, this is being sourced from my VSA server, and that's where I need to focus, and I need to shut things down or disconnect and that sort of thing. Obviously, having good backups that are reliable, that you can restore from, and that data is going to be good when you restore it. That was also super important. And to your point, the missing piece is having a plan, and then beyond that is testing that plan, making sure that plan is actually something that can withstand some stress. And that, I think that's something that we'll talk about here in a little bit, but having a way to kind of rehearse your plan, make sure that you understand where the pitfalls are, is something that's really, really helpful. And lastly, log retention. I think that is something that is often overlooked, whether it's event logs or whether it's just, in the case of VSA, IIS logs and the specific Kaseya server logs. But really, anytime you're running a web server internally, you need to have those logs so that you know what's going on. And that's not a cheap thing to do, but having a good backup plan and not skipping log files as part of your backup is a really good thing. So I don't know if you guys have seen that too, but.
Yeah, data forensics and being able to track through and being able to quickly look through those logs and kind of get some detailed information about what's happening is super critical and important to kind of really understand, not only post-mortem, but when an event's happening. It really helps you kind of dial in and figure out where the problems start popping up. We had a question come in from Eric. Said, now that time has passed and analysis has been done across the industry, have you guys seen any day-to-day operational changes in response to the incident?
It's a really good question. I had a friend of mine that got hit with this, and I've been talking with him a lot over the past month as he's recovered, and he honestly, one of the big things for him is honestly talking. I want to talk about this in a couple minutes. Is having better conversations with his vendors. And having that what is your guys' security posture, and what are you guys doing and are willing to do in the future to make sure that you guys maybe not necessarily are not going to get hit with a supply chain attack, but that you can mitigate and have a timely response. And I think that's an important piece. Some people are changing their tools, maybe adding MFA. I think that's a good thing. MFA would not obviously have stopped this attack, but having it is just important, and you need to have it on all accounts. Ignoring a service account because of this one automation you want to do, we can't really live with that anymore. We really need to have MFA everywhere.
Did Huntress make any changes to kind of your operational side to account for the potential future attacks similar to this? Like, did you guys make any changes to help support your MSPs and your partners any better?
Yeah, so the way we looked at this is, we have a security-minded design process. So Huntress was founded by 4 former NSA cyber operators. So they were doing offensive cyber attacks. That was their job, right? And so that's kind of their mindset when it comes to building software, is we assume compromise. And so when this attack came, though, it did make us look inward and say, you know, what more can we do, and let's make sure that we're doing that. So some of the steps we're taking is we've engaged with Bishop Fox to do a software audit, and then we'll be taking those the results from that audit, you know, addressing any issues that they find, and then publishing those results, and really then continuing that process to make sure that we are following industry best practices, and then also being public and transparent about that as well.
Yeah, we did something similar, and I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth on, you know, as the responsibilities as a supply chain vendor that we hold responsible on ourselves. But we did a lot of the same things. One of the big operational changes that we made was kind of making sure that we had the right teams in place to make sure, you know, we've got the back end of helping partners recover in these situations. So we made sure that we have kind of the call tree and the plan in place. You know, it's like that red team incident response team that when an event does happen, you know, we activate, you know, the team, we make a phone call, and it's all the right people are on call, all the right people are available, and we have a plan in place to be able to respond and help partners in a timely manner. You know, I can only imagine as an MSP going through something like this, not being able to get a hold of your vendor in a timely manner that holds all of your data and your backups, or is helping you recover or detect or remediate against these things, and what that would feel like. So we want to make sure that we had the right systems in place to support our partners.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah, another quick question. Did any partners impacted by, say, attack have any of their Replibit BDRs impacted by the attack, or did these systems remain intact? Not sure if it's a question relevant for the webinar, just curious. Thanks, Justin, for the question. Every partner that got hit that did have Replibit BDR was able to fully recover. None of our systems were compromised. So every partner that was compromised, and we had partners using some of our other products as well, every partner was able to recover from backup, and none of the backups were compromised in there. So that was good to hear.
Yes, that is good to hear. So I think that actually that question leads really well into kind of the next thing I think we wanted to cover is, you know, how do we get better prepared, and it's through layered security. I like to look at this through the NIST cybersecurity framework because it's really helpful to kind of break things down just to 5 domains. The MITRE ATT&CK framework is great, but it's really busy and it's really hard to kind of narrow things down, right? But you know, I think what I have seen, and Ben, you may be able to kind of validate this from your side too, is I see a lot of people spend a lot of money in the protect domain. You know, we have our firewalls, we have MFA, we use strong passwords, we train people not to open phishing emails, even though they do that anyway. We have next gen AV, or, you know, multiple AVs sometimes, hopefully not too often, but you spend lots of money because we've been told for years that just have an AV and have a really good AV and get the new one, get the best one. And then what they forget is that those tools get bypassed. You know, hackers spend their entire day finding ways to bypass security tools, and they only have to get it right one time, right? And then unfortunately, I think sometimes the idea is, well, if my AV doesn't work, I'm going to cross my fingers that my backup software is going to work. And you know, Axient, you guys can respond with that and have good backups, but I don't think that's really the best posture to have. And I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, there's 2 things on that you brought up. That's a great point. First is anytime I talk about security with MSPs or anybody in general, I always say that your cybersecurity playbook and your plays that you're running in your table reads need to account and consider what you do when you're attacked and when you're breached, because it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. Like you said, these are criminals that have tons of money, tons of time, tons of resources, and they only have to get it right once. You've got to get it right every time. And so if you're just planning and always being protected by something and never having a breach, you're woefully unprepared. The second part of that is, I think you're right. I think there's a giant dark area in the layered security approach that people take, where they focus very heavily on prevention and identification and protection on your kind of timeline here. And then they jump all the way over to recovery and say, okay, I'm going to protect you at the perimeter, or I'm going to be able to recover from backups, but there's nothing in between. And it's like this giant, blind spot for MSPs, where it really needs to be a concerted layered security approach. It's not about one thing in the stack that's going to help you. It's having all of these things, and your backups really should be considered your last line of defense. You want to do everything possible to not have to use those backups. And by having that dark spot, that blind spot in the middle there under the detect and respond area, you're really missing out on a huge portion of your security.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it's interesting that, you know, we have different levels of different types of protect tools, right? Because we know that just the firewall isn't enough, or just the AV isn't enough. We don't want to miss any of those things, and that's important, right? It's important to have different tools and technologies that will see things across different IOCs, so that we know what's happening at the network level, the endpoint level, and that sort of thing. And honestly, we've seen this in Windows natively, right? Microsoft, you're starting back with Windows XP, adding in Windows Firewall, and then over time, Security Essentials, and then Windows Defender, and now even just the baseline security capabilities inside of Windows 10 is really amazing, the things that they've added, and all of that kind of builds to having or aligns with having multiple types of technologies, whether it's a tool or whether it's something built in to cover different IOCs. And I think one thing that's often missed is the threat hunting piece. So we call that out. So threat hunting for things after prevention. So we know that something is going to get compromised. We're going to bypass, bad guys are going to bypass your preventive tools and anything on that protect layer. And so what are you doing to look for that? And that threat hunting can look two different ways. Maybe you have your own team of security experts, and you've got that budget, and you've got that manpower that you can spend with people looking through all of the logs and all of that stuff from your various tools that come in, or use something like Huntress, where we're looking at things that are persistent mechanisms on an endpoint, whether it's a server or workstation. And our threat research team looks through those, finds those things, whether it's a web shell that's being dropped because of proxy shelling, right? We've had that over proxy logon from March and proxy shell from this past weekend after the Black Hat conference. We've seen spend a lot of time over the weekend and started seeing stuff for that even as early as a couple weeks ago. So having that stuff, whether you have a service or you have a team internally that does it, is something that's really important. And then the ability to respond to that. And that's where, from Huntress, what we do is, for those that don't know, is if we find something that we detect as a persistent mechanism, we'll actually show you how to remove it, or even give you the option to do that as well. So just to kind of to throw that out there. So I think that's we also wanted to touch on the supply chain attack and vendors and security posture. And I already talked about that a little bit on my side, but what have you guys done? Because you guys have a lot of data, right? I mean, you guys are taking customers with most likely going to be PII, PHI, all of the regulatory requirements around that. How do you guys protect that and make sure your customers and their data can trust that you're okay with that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that we take very seriously. From again, as a supply chain vendor, we know that we are constantly under the spotlight of people trying to attack us. So we've done a number of things, right? So in product, we have things like our air gap feature, which kind of is that physical separation from deletion request to actually deleting data. So if somebody does compromise your systems, they can't actually do a deletion, so you always have data that you can recover from. And then even going so far as putting honeypots into the platform, so threat and cyber criminals think that they've been successful with deleting, and if they think they're successful, they're not going to try anymore. So even going to that level, which I don't believe a lot of other products kind of go to that level, but we've done that. And then from our perspective, to make sure we have secure code and we're responding to these things, we've set, we go through and we do annual security pen tests for all of our security products, all of our products across the board. We do data center pen testing, and when we do our pen testing, we presume worst case scenarios. So when we've done our last pen test in our data center, we gave the security company VPN credentials into the network and said, do your worst, try to figure out how to get in, move laterally, compromise systems, how long can you gain persistence before we detect you, things like that. And we want to presume, hey, like you said, we've got to get it right every time. They've got to get it right once. So we presume that a developer is going to do something stupid, click on an email, get a keylogger, get access remotely or something, and get that foothold into the network and then gain persistence. So we presume worst case scenario under those circumstances. So We do that on a regular basis. We also go through and do risk assessments. So we have a third-party company come in and do a full risk assessment of all of our infrastructure, operations, everything across the board. And then we set very high, as I know you guys do, we set very high SLAs on found bugs. So we have an internal policy that says if there is a critical vulnerability or a remote code execution vulnerability that's discovered in the code, that's a drop everything, get that resolved and remediated immediately. So it's not like, hey, you have a month to resolve that. It's you need to stop work in that sprint, resolve the issue or remediate, protect against it, and then resolve it. It needs to be done immediately. So
Right.
I think it's beholden on every vendor that's in the chain that's supplying a product to MSPs to hold that very high level of assurance and security on themselves, because we are the gatekeepers to a lot of these companies. And you know, if you work with a company that can't talk to you about what they do from security, or talk to you about their SLAs, or show you the summary results of a pen test, it's not really a company you should consider working with.
Yeah, it's important, and I think that most people don't realize the importance of talking to your vendors about those things too. And you know, obviously, when you're holding data and you have access to all of that because it's there, obviously it's encrypted and all of those things and following the regulatory requirements. But there's still that level of trust, and trust for vendors is something that that's super important. And it's good to hear that you guys have that whole process in place, especially, you know, with backup vendors. It's so important. So
yeah, I mean, you guys, you know, similar with you know, there's agents and we deploy things on systems and we have access to things. And the worst case scenario, again, is for any of us to be the vector of attack for somebody else, right? That would be a nightmare scenario, I think.
Yep. It absolutely is, and that's where our security audit is coming in. Is starting that either this month or early next month, if I remember correctly, to be able to go through that and make sure that we're not that place that can be taken advantage of. So it's a good step to take, and then more will be coming as well as we work towards SOC 2 and all of the other kind of regulatory things as well. So what's interesting about this framework, and you alluded to this in what you guys do with your pen test, is that like this whole concept, this whole framework assumes compromise, and it assumes an incident is going to happen. So I think we can all be in agreement, you know, hopefully everyone here can be in agreement that something is going to happen or something will happen. So then the question is, how are you going to respond? And what are you going to do with that? And having a plan. You know, I have in my notes here, you know, what does an effective incident response plan include? And the first thing is a plan, because I think too often we find that people don't have one at all because they haven't, you know, I know when thinking about it, it's really overwhelming to even start thinking about like building one out. But what have you guys seen from I know we have the checklist and everything it's in the webinar. I'll be getting that after the show as well. But what have you guys seen from people like kind of just starting out building one? Like what's the first step other than just getting started?
Yeah, I think that's really the hardest part. I think a lot of people are just like, trying to figure out what framework or what, how to create an incident response policy. Like, hey, I need to create this. I don't know what a good incident response policy has. Like, where do I start, right? Like, what are the pieces? And then there's things that people overlook and they don't think about, like, okay, well, the communication, you know, we're just going to email everyone if an event happens. Well, if somebody has access to your systems, email may not be the smartest way to be, you know, communicating with your team on what you're going to be doing to resolve something. So thinking about things like that and kind of going through the process, and also having the right contacts in place, right? Having that phone tree, not only of who your first contacts are going to be, but who the kind of incident response manager is, who's going to, you know, what the communication plan is out to customers, you know, what the cadence is going to be. Are there regulatory requirements that you have to meet as far as like, hey, this was a breach of this size, I have to contact Health and Human Services, I have to contact DoD. Who are the people that are necessary for your compliance standards? And do you have that information readily accessible for you that you can access it really quickly if you need to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, you know, part of this is in the checklist. I kind of bring that up, you know, beginning copy, but there's, you know, there's not only the technical response of getting things resolved, forensic integrity and actually restoring customers and making sure things are okay. But there's also the business side of that. I mean, this conversation is not just technical, it's also business. So you need to make sure that you have contacts with the right people, whether it's insurance, law enforcement, your regulatory items, like you mentioned, making sure your attorney knows what's going on. And some of these things can be done beforehand. Like you don't want to be writing your plan while you're responding to an incident, because that's the absolute worst time to be writing your plan, because you're in the thick of it, right? I mean, that's these, especially comms. I mean, as you mentioned, using good OPSEC of if your email is compromised, probably don't want to start using that for emailing your customers. But having those communications kind of decided and pre-built is also super helpful and important.
Question came into the chat. Sebastian says, do you guys hunters provide marketing material we can use to sell this before buying licenses or seats?
Yeah, so Sebastian, it's a great question. We do have, there's a couple ways that we handle that. So we have a partner enablement that provides some co-branded materials that you can use for selling, and usually that's part of your account, or it will be part of your account if you were to purchase. If you do set up a trial, you would actually have access to that as well, and so it's something that you can do even during a trial that we provide. You can go to hunters.com and there's a start a trial button up at the top, and we'd be happy to help you with that. Thank you for asking that question.
And then Ben Jones is asking, are there any logging software that we recommend specifically? So do you guys have anything specific that you recommend?
I don't have anything specific necessarily. I think the idea there, and it's a callback to making sure that you have the data that you need to respond to an incident. I think what's more important is that your logging isn't turned off, and if you are rotating it because of disk space, I mean, we know that. I mean, I know with Exchange, you can't let those logs run forever. You have to rotate them. Same thing with IIS. You can't let them live forever because the logs will be ridiculously large and chew up disk space. But just having them and making sure that they're backed up, I think is important. So, third-party tools that kind of collect that are great, but that can also be expensive. I think if you have a solution to even just use the built-in logs for the applications that are there, I think that's just as important as having a third party.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think having a third-party tool, you can definitely implement something like a Splunk or something like that. They'll do a lot of that log aggregation, but it turns into a tool that you wind up using that costs a lot of money, that doesn't show a lot of value for you. So you wind up dropping it in the long term. I think, like you said, I think just having those logs maintained, having them backed up, using log rotation, and then depending on your industry, maybe even dumping them over to like cold storage or something like that into like an Amazon or something like that, where you can just kind of retain them for a very low cost. Super valuable. And then understanding what the requirements are for data retention. Like, is it 30 days? Is it 60 days? Is it 2 years?
Yeah, regulatory is going to define a lot of that, and then I think it's really just finding the best fit. I think cold storage is a great solution for things you have to store, especially that long-term stuff, and you can store it super cost-effective. I see a couple of other questions in here. Do we want to kind of go through those?
Yeah, there's a couple that were gonna come up naturally as we kind of go through some of these slides. So it was off on some of them, but if there's something else.
And I think I think these are gonna come up. I think as we mentioned, the plan, right? Have a plan, but then after you have a plan, you got to test the plan. And we have a tabletop exercise that is available at that link. I think these slides are also in there, so the link will be in there as well. But the testing your plan is almost as important as having the plan, because if you can build a great plan, but if you don't stress test it and go through scenarios of, well, we planned for a customer getting ransomed, and our plan was I'm going to use my RMM to remote into their computers and figure that out. But if the RMM was the way they got ransomed, then you have to shut it down, or the RMM was compromised in some other way, not even the ones doing the ransom, but you have to deal with that. So working through those scenarios is super important. We've got this resource that's available for you guys to be able to have some example scenarios that you can go through and then build your own. But what have you guys seen, when it comes to testing plans and just plans in general from your side?
This is probably, thinking about it, this is probably the #1 gap I see in nearly every MSP that we've talked with. I think doing tabletop reads and doing those, running through plays and kind of practicing and making it real is the absolute best way for an MSP to relay the value of security to a customer, right? We often hear from MSPs like, yeah, it's great. I would love to include security as part of my standardized offering, but I'm dealing with mom and pop shops a lot of times that just don't want to pay for security. And so for me to pass through that cost, it's just not possible. Like, people don't want to pay for it. And doing a tabletop read is probably the #1 way to explain the value of security to somebody who doesn't quite get it. And doing those plays, doing a tabletop read, going through, and these things should be done regularly. Like I've said previously, if your incident response policy hasn't been updated and you haven't done a tabletop read or a play in 3 to 6 months, it's useless at this point. It's nearly useless because the threat landscape is evolving so rapidly.
Yeah.
If you don't review those things at least quarterly, you're out of date, because we had SolarWinds happen last year, and a lot of playbooks didn't account for those sort of things. We had Kaseya happen now, though your playbooks aren't accounting for those things. So doing regular tabletop reads and updating your policies and your playbook and your IR, hugely important and most often overlooked.
Yeah, and staffing is a challenge too. So having people from the different areas of the business be involved is also really important. And that's one way you can involve more people, but either you maybe have a team lead that's responsible for that, through each level of help desk all the way up to the business side. But even rotating that, I mean, getting more people involved so that there's buy-in from everybody, I think is super helpful too, just from a practical standpoint.
Well, and that's one of the great things about working with, folks like Huntress and others in the industry is like, look, like you said, you could definitely hire somebody to do a lot of this stuff internally, but that's a huge expense, right? And that's somebody dedicated full time and that's looking at it and doing threat hunting and going out and understanding what's in the marketplace. Or you can kind of push that off to experts like Huntress, like others in the marketplace, that they've got a team of people doing this full time and are going to do a way better job than one person or a small team at an MSP. So it's best to leverage the experts that are doing this on a regular basis, that can keep you updated on these things and know what they're looking for and kind of be your eyes and ears on the ground. It's like doubling your team size without having to spend more money on it.
Yeah, exactly. And that actually leads in really well to the next thing. So we have a plan, we've tested it, but then like there's day 0, the attack happens, and now we actually have to talk about our plan and use it, right? So we have all of these things that we have to do, and I wanted to us to kind of talk about just a kind of couple of the first things that have to be done when we're starting when an incident happens. And honestly, as I look at some of these, a lot of this can actually happen before the attack happens. So these are things that you should be talking about early on, but the first thing we need to do when we have an attack is not to go out and start restoring for backup, right? I mean, we probably need to make some phone calls first.
Yeah, Luis Alvarez in the questions here made a comment exactly to this line. Incident response can be significantly affected if a client has cyber insurance. You may not be able to start restoration until they clear it. You gotta. Oh, he jumped off. He's got to jump off. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yep.
One of the things that people don't think about when an incident happens is MSPs are not lawyers. MSPs are not incident response vendors. They're not PR people, right? And so
we're not lawyers either. Just for the record, we aren't lawyers either. Exactly. Our lawyers made us say that, but just so we're clear.
Yes, but those are great points. So making sure you're contacting the experts early on, contacting your legal counsel to understand what you should be doing and what you should be saying, hugely important. And then contacting your insurance carrier immediately to say, what do I need to do? Do you have a designated incident response vendor I have to work with? Or do you need somebody to start doing forensics, and when can I start doing restoration? So we talk about, we're kicking off a series internally about backups are dead, right? Backups are woefully inadequate these days for protection. It's truly having a business continuity solution that includes backups that's important, because if you don't have a way to virtualize your environments and the insurance company says, stop everything, we need unfettered access to your systems for 2 weeks, what are you going to do? You can't conduct any business for that period of time.
Yeah. So it's probably important that you don't just pick the first lawyer on the street. Then when you go to engage legal counsel, right? You probably should have someone that has maybe some IT experience or something. I mean, you guys have specific, I mean, maybe not specific attorneys to reach out to, but I'm sure you guys have heard horror stories of when the wrong legal counsel was chosen.
Yeah, don't pick your lawyer off a bus bench
or a billboard.
or a billboard. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And cyber insurance, I think that's something that is getting a lot of, especially after the most recent events, is getting a lot of coverage, and they do have requirements. So that is something that makes sure that you do contact them first. As part of your plan, have the contact info that you know who to call and when you call them to get the right IR firms if they require any. And then often most of the, or many of the insurance companies will even have breach coaches that can help you, either helping with your plan early or talk through the process as you're going through it, which I think is also something that's really helpful, because we don't, I mean, all of it, myself and you guys in the MSP field don't spend your day doing breaches. You're hoping not to have one. So having somebody that's experienced in that is helpful as well. The other thing, conducting risk analysis. And so we've talked about the legal portion and kind of understanding that part and making sure your attorneys are helping you with messaging and all of that. But then we have to talk about this really uncomfortable conversation of, it's not always the best plan to restore just any particular customer. Sometimes, and our CEO has said an exercise he likes to suggest is make a Venn diagram of the customers of one side are the customers that are encrypted, and the other side is the customers who are most likely to litigate. And where they overlap, start there. And your attorneys can help you with that, right? I mean, because a lot of the litigation stuff is going to come down to regulatory requirements and kind of the culture of the company, and it's all going to be very local. But I think that sometimes there's a mistake of made, and let's just get this one done and then we'll move on to the others, when in reality you need to prioritize differently. So how do you guys see that kind of playing out and with your partners?
Yeah, especially, it made it very obvious with the Kaseya attack, where, you had this huge swath of customers that were impacted, and you had to do that prioritization and figure out, okay, how am I going to start, taking bites out of this watermelon, right? And,
Yep.
you got it, or bites out of the elephant, as the saying goes.
Yep.
I think a lot, you're 100% right in that risk analysis, and that Venn diagram is a great analogy in figuring out who the ones that are going to scream the loudest and the most likely to put you out of business. And a lot of that, again, can be driven by regulatory compliance. So folks that are dealing with CMMC or FINRA or SEC compliance, they're the ones most likely that have the higher retention requirements, have the higher data requirements, and so they're the ones that are probably going to scream the loudest, because they're potentially impacted by fines and fees and other things if they're out of compliance on that. So really understanding and figuring out that order of operations, hugely important and getting that done ahead of time. So again, like we said, don't do that in the heat of battle and trying to figure out like who's screaming the loudest. Figure that out ahead of time and have people prioritized internally, that you say, here's the ones that I'm going to deal with first, and then we're going to go down the line from there. And
just a side note on that, you really need to know your customers and have a good relationship. And that's, being a good partner with your customers that's really part of this whole conversation. The better you know your customers, makes these conversations a lot easier to have.
Great point.
The last thing we talk about, understand the implications. And, I think one thing that, as we can kind of hear this talking through it, but every decision that is made during this process is going to get picked apart. I mean, there's always going to be somebody that is going to come and is going to complain because you chose X instead of Z, or you chose B instead of A, or why didn't you have this thing done? And so tabletop exercise can help with that, because it helps uncover those things, because what you're doing during those tabletop exercises is picking your decisions apart. You have to do that, right? Is make it, for those who have not gone through a tabletop exercise, it's really helpful, because you you have a decision tree, and then you have to pick apart that decision and make sure that you can defend what you did, and maybe it needs to be improved. And it's a lot better to find that during a tabletop than it is to find it in the middle of an incident, for sure.
Yeah, it's like when you're going through audits, a lot of times the auditors like to say it's not what you do, it's what you can prove, right? And so
Yep.
going through those tabletop reads and proving and defending the decisions you make are going to help you fine tune and sharpen that incident response plan and those plays continuously.
Yep, absolutely. And I think something that you mentioned earlier, why do we do all of this stuff? Why does this stuff matter? And I think that litigation conversation is not a fun one, but it's something that's real, and it's something that unfortunately this kind of attack can put people out of business, not just our customers, but the partners as well. So from your side, how do you see the layered security and being ready helping not just in profitability, but staying open, quite frankly, right?
Yeah, I mean, these are truly business ending type events for a lot of businesses, not only for an MSP, but God forbid if a supply chain vendor like us got hit, it could be a business ending type of event. So these are extremely high stakes scenarios. We're not just talking about, oh my God, I lost grandma's pictures, right? These are high stakes situations that we're in. There was an interesting stat I saw recently that said something like 35% of businesses that have been ransomware and pay the ransomware will be hit again within a year with a similar attack. So one ransomware attack you may be able to survive, but can you survive two of them, right? And what does that reputational impact mean for you? And then on top of it, you have a lot of regulations coming out from a legislative perspective too, where states like Louisiana passed laws that say you have to be licensed as an MSP in order to do business in the state of Louisiana. Texas passed the wall of shame. If you get breached, you get your name published on a wall, right? New York or New Jersey and Connecticut have laws that say you have to disclose when a breach happens, not if data has left your network or if there's data compromised. So that means if you've been phished successfully, if somebody's gotten access to your network that shouldn't have, that's a disclosable breach in those states. So these are, not only is it the cost and the potential ransom that you're paying, it's the business impact, it's the lawsuits, it's the legislation to the industry overall and the governance of the MSP industry overall. But these are reputational impacts too. It's your name being put out there in the industry and saying, I was breached, I was compromised twice, and having your information out there. I mean, these are the types of things that need to be thought about when you're thinking about what I'm going to do to prevent these things from happening, or if they do happen, what I'm going to do to prevent them from being massive events.
Yep, absolutely. And you would think about the state level, things, and that doesn't even touch the federal level. But then if you have some of our larger partners that operate in multiple states, they have multiple things to consider, whether it's the state level privacy laws or data breach laws and all that. There's a lot of impact there, and we're not attorneys, so that's why you should talk to a good one. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is something that we all kind of intuitively know. I don't live in Florida, so I have full disclosure, I don't live in Florida, but in Florida, hurricanes do happen. And when we think about businesses that are strong and successful, or maybe not necessarily strong, but they're mature businesses, we don't measure them based on their ability to make hurricanes go away or to dodge them somehow, put up a bigger wall around their business. It's really how quickly can they recover. And I think today it's safe to say that cybersecurity incidents are going to happen, and that's our hurricane. And we need to be able to respond to those as an industry and have the mentality that our business or our partner's business is not going to be judged by blocking or not having an incident, but really how do we respond and how do we partner better with our customers to do that. And that's it's kind of sobering, but it's the truth. And I think it's something that more people need to be willing to understand and talk about.
Yeah, we see the worst on our side. We're there to help people pick up the pieces when they've been ransomware and don't want to pay the ransom. And we're seeing, you know, between 3 and 5 successful ransomware attacks per week that we're helping partners recover from. And these are not partners who are like, you know, oblivious to security. These are partners that think that they're doing all the right stuff. Like we're using, you know, advanced, you know, AV and, you know, next gen AV and all those sort of things. And we're doing, you know, we've got MFA enabled and we thought we were doing the right things. But on a long enough timeline, like you said, everyone's going to get hit, and you shouldn't be judging yourself on preventing and saying I've never been hit, because you're just jinxing yourself and it's just a matter of time. You should be saying, you know, looking at these incidents and saying, how do we respond to them and how do we up our game a little bit more every time something happens?
Yep. And the way you up your game is what we've been talking about for the past 50 minutes, is having an incident response plan, practicing that incident response plan, and using layered security. So I think we hear layered security a lot, and it's something we've been hearing for years, but I think having, rather than focusing on just adding more layers that are in the same category, having you diversifying that a little bit, and you know, to kind of go back to that NIST framework, using the detect and respond as you filling those gaps, because that's really where I think a lot of gaps are in the MSP industry, and really the entire SMB market, quite frankly, because they don't have millions of dollars to spend on racks of equipment. They're trying to find the best tools that they can get for the money that they have.
Right.
Did we have any other questions come in that we kind of want to go through before we kind of wrap things up, because we're getting close to the end here?
Yeah, we had a couple questions we can answer right now. So one question for you is, how do you guys compare to something like Perch? Is it the same thing or is it a different solution?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different solution. So what we're doing on our side is we're not ingesting all of the logs from all of it, every single endpoint and network device and that sort of thing, like a Perch would do. But we are really focusing on the Windows endpoint. So we have an agent for the Windows, and then we're working on our Mac agent as well. And we're looking for persistent foothold. So as soon as that attacker has made it past those preventive security solutions, and they've established some sort of foothold or persistence, which means they have a way to get back onto that machine after it reboots, or even if you change credentials, or if there's a user logs off, they still have that ability to get back to the machine and then do their discovery internally, and then potentially, you know, either ransomware or data exfil, whatever they're going to do. So we're focused specifically on that. And then what we do, instead of sending you just alerts of things that here's some events that happened, you may want to look into this, we will also, we actually send you not just the foothold, but how to remove it. And then we also have the option, we have, I call it an easy button, that allows you to remove those footholds, so that you can, you know, go on about your day and clean up that stuff from the endpoint. So a little bit different than Perch, and definitely a kind of a different place in the market. So I see another question. I see another question for, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ben, I'm sorry.
So you guys are really focused on like minimizing dwell time and keeping that persistence out, right? Yeah.
Yep. And that's what our founders, focused on, was getting persistent access. That was their job, right? And so what they did is they said, we want to help the SMB market basically defend against the stuff that we used to do. And then so in terms of I see Kenneth's question, comparing to Rocket Cyber, you know, there's some overlap, right? Like, so there is overlap on the various products, and I think what the best thing you need to do is to find the product that fits best within your budget and for where your customers' needs are, and that would be the best way to go.
One other question looks like came in for Axient. Logging and backup, is the 1 hour backup interval on direct to cloud adequate for servers, or should the interval be reduced to 30 minutes or 15 minutes? Great question, Hal. I think that really comes down to your needs and the importance of the data, right? And do you have a specific RPO that you're trying to shoot for? If this is mission critical, high change rate type servers that are running like SQL databases and things like that, or anything that's, you know, got a very high rate of change, you may want to lower that down to like a 15-minute window, just so you have faster recovery and a better RPO. If these are general servers that are just kind of file servers, and if you fall back an hour, it's not really the end of the world, great, set it to an hour. One of the benefits of using Axion is we don't charge, it's unlimited storage, unlimited retention. So you can back up 15 minutes, you can back up by an hour. With our deduplication that we do, it's not going to cost you any extra. So set it, there's no harm in setting it whatever you want. It's also chain free, so you don't have to worry about managing your chains or doing new fulls every year or anything else. So, it's kind of a dealer's choice, whatever works best for you, Hal.
I think it's a good point to, a lot of this is risk management, right? And so we're trying to reduce risk and knowing your customer, having that good customer profile so that you can apply what's best, because what's good for a healthcare company is not necessarily good for retail. And you just need to be able to weigh those out.
Yeah, one point you brought up earlier that I forgot to mention, I don't know how much you read with the guy over at the Cont Ransomware gang that posted his scripts and playbooks online after his angry leaving of the group. But it was really interesting. It kind of gave us a look and an insight into what a ransomware as a service organization looks like. And these guys are getting vacation time and percentages of the ransom that they collect. Some of the interesting things that I saw in there were specifically, they talked about exfiltration of data, right? So there's more of a focus on getting data out of your network and holding that hostage, because they know, like, if you can recover and detect us, the ransom's not going to get paid. So we want to get your data out, so hold you ransom for that. Two was specifically talking about how to disable many of these next gen AVs and things like, Defender and things like that. Like, here's your script, here's how you go through and do it. And it wasn't just one, it was multiple products. And so when we talk about a layered security approach and something like Huntress sitting in the middle of your detection and your backups, that's why it's so important, because these systems have known exploits that can be turned off and disabled. And so having something else in there that says, hey, something's going on in here that your AV didn't pick up, you may want to look at this. It was really interesting to understand the workings of these guys. So I don't know if you got a chance to read any of it, but
I think the interesting part for me was that their own, I think it was a 2-week SLA that they wanted to be in and out in 2 weeks and have all the data exfilled. And so, we know, like, from various, the Verizon data breach report and others, I mean, for years, the average dwell time is 100 days, right? So Conti takes that down significantly to 2 weeks. And you think about somebody sitting around your network for 2 weeks, how much data can they get? That's a big question. And not, if you don't know they're there, that's really bad. And so our goal is to make the hunters earn every inch of their access. And so whether they've disabled AV or disabled your other security tools or deleted logs, because we know they're going to do that. That's kind of part of their MO, right? But if they have a persistent foothold, that's what we're looking for, and finding that and removing it stops that chain, and then they're done, right? Because they no longer have that access to the network. And then exposing things like, or showing you things that are exposed, like open RDP, which we know is the #1 mechanism that people are getting into networks, and sometimes people don't even know that those ports are still open. Please keep track of your VPN credentials and make sure they're not leaked, or at least have MFA on it, things like that. Those are all things that are part of good security posture, layered security, risk management. All of that stuff kind of fits in together really nicely.
Yeah, Kyle gave a really good presentation. Kyle, the CEO of Huntress, gave a presentation a little while back on showing kind of like what a threat in real time, what an attack in real time looks like, and kind of going through and simulating and showing how easy it is to gain persistence into a network, and how easy it is to do things like disabling your antivirus and installing a keylogger and what that looks like, the results and things like that. So it's, when we talk about that layered security approach, these are the reasons why, these threat actors know exactly what they're doing. They know the steps that we're doing, and so they're trying to stay one step ahead of us all the time. So it's not about building the highest wall, it's about building the most walls in between you and that precious data in the inside.
Yep, absolutely.
Kenneth had another question for Axion. How does Axion stack up against StorageCraft? Great question. StorageCraft is a great product. They do a lot of great stuff, great UI, great everything. The biggest difference between Axion and StorageCraft is probably, besides the tech and our direct cloud offering, which is a true appliance-free BDR, with local virtualization and all that stuff. The biggest difference between StorageCraft and Axion is the chain-free technology, right? So with StorageCraft, you're managing those chains. You know, every year you've got to take a new initial and then manage those chains and your data storage on top of that. Axion is true chain-free, so there's no chain management. You take your initial backup, you do your full, and then after that, it's incrementals thereafter, and you can restore at any point. With a chain backup, for those of you who aren't familiar, if just as it sounds like in a chain, if any link in that chain is broken, you can't restore anything past that chain. So if your chain breaks, your backups break. And so chain management is super important for that. With chain free, you can lose any one of those incremental backups along the way and not have any further ones down the line be affected by that. And so you can recover anything along the way.
Good stuff.
I think that's the last question that came in. Jason, I think this was super awesome. It was great talking. I'd love to be able to do this again with you and have our partners on and maybe go into some more depth on, some of the things that Huntress does and how, the layered security approach and how vendors like us work together. I think this is hopefully our partners on the call got a lot of value out of this as well.
Yeah, I hope so. This is good. And if you're interested in hearing more from either Axion or Huntress, you should be getting a poll here in just a moment. Just indicate there whether you'd like to hear more. Be built into the platform, and somebody will reach out to you. And if you have questions, please feel free to reach out. I was going to put Ben's cell phone, but they wouldn't let me do that. So you can just email him or myself, and be happy to reach out and help you out any way that we can. So we appreciate everybody joining today. And I don't know, Olivia, if there's any other kind of closing things that need to be done, but otherwise, Ben, I appreciate this. It was fun doing this webinar with you, and I look forward to Axion and Huntress working together some more on stuff. So
absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And Jason and Ben, thank you so much. Everyone today will receive a recording of today's session, and you can download those 2 assets under handout. So again, everyone, thanks so much for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks.